Most people want a passionate, healthy relationship. But the shocking reality is a lot of people end up in toxic, codependent relationships. Here in this video, we will talk about 5 ways or strategies that you can put in place to make sure that you are not in a codependent relationship so that you can have a healthy relationship. Because a interdependent relationship, it is often a healthy relationship. It's where you have two people who come together and agree to meet each other's needs in a certain way, and it's not imbalance. It has a lot of balance to it. It has a lot of mutualism. Each people pour into each other. It's not only one person doing all the pouring or one person doing the enabling and the other person taking advantage of that. So in the last video, we were talking about what codependency is and some different signs that you could possibly be codependent. So in reference of this video, when I say codependent or codependency, I mean a relationship where a person or the relationship has dynamics of imbalance in a sense that you need someone else to meet your needs emotionally and psychologically. Someone else is responsible for meeting your own needs. So however you feel inside, that's often based off something external to you, somebody else. Somebody else controls how you feel. It can often involve imbalance of power or narcissism, where one person is a narcissist and the other person isn't. Or there's often some type of enabling. So one person enables the other person. And essentially it becomes an unhealthy or toxic bond or relationship. And it's the opposite of what a healthy or interdependent relationship, because a healthy relationship is kind of balanced. It's where people communicate their needs to one another and they both meet each other's needs collectively. But they are good without one another. They meet their own needs for the most part. Of course, we are social creatures. We can't meet all of our social needs. We can't meet all of our needs, but the person does a very good job at meeting their own needs. They can do fine without one another, but together they come together and they help one another and strive to have a nice, healthy relationship. So it's the opposite of what codependence looks like. So that brings us to the first way of the 5 ways in which you can have a healthy relationship and not a codependent one. And that is having clear boundaries and communication in the relationship. So that combines both elements, which are boundaries and communication. So you should be able to know what you want first and foremost. That's what comes with being aware. And you should be able to express that to the other person. See, a lot of times we come from maybe our childhood where we couldn't express ourselves. And a lot of times that can transfer into adulthood where a person may not feel comfortable expressing their needs, or past relationships where expressing themselves would always be a negative thing or end up in some type of fight or some type of disagreement or something like that. But the reality is, a healthy relationship, a person can communicate their needs, their wants, and they can do this collectively with one another. Also in boundaries, you have to be able to establish boundaries. A lot of times people assume things, but they haven't clearly expressed them. So when I go volunteer with the kids in juvenile centers, when we talk about boundaries, I tell them, don't ever assume people know your boundaries, because sometimes common sense, it isn't always common. So you have to be able to articulate and communicate those boundaries to people. Hey, these are my boundaries here. These are the things I will and won't accept in a relationship. These things are a deal breaker, whatever it looks like for you. But for the most part, we know what that is. And if you don't communicate that at the early stages of relationship with a person, you can end up in a codependent relationship where you are getting ran all over or taken advantage of. And you can just end up in a toxic relationship. And it's all because you didn't start out expressing those boundaries. You didn't start out communicating your needs and wants, and both parties having a clear idea of what that looks like for one another. See, a lot of times people move too fast. They just start meeting people and engaging with people based off some type of physical attraction or just casual conversation, or maybe even deep conversations, but they aren't really getting down to the nitty gritty of the important parts of the relationship, like the boundaries. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable. I know a lot of times it is uncomfortable, but you have to learn to lean into it and establish those regardless, because it'd rather be uncomfortable up front than 6 months into it, a year, a couple years into it, it end up being a unhealthy or a codependent toxic relationship. So we rather just have the uncomfortable conversations up front. And of course, throughout life or the relationship, you will have to come back together and discuss those because life changes. But you have to have those initially up front before really just engaging with people. So that's the first one. Making sure you are able to communicate your boundaries, express them and communicate them to the other person, and make sure you stand firm on those also. So a second way to not be codependent in relationships is to not enable other people. So a lot of times we have a tendency to want to save people we love and care about from their own decisions or their own mistakes. Or we have this misconception that when you love and care about people, it's your job, your responsibility to save them from whatever they are going through. And this is not the truth. This is not the reality of the matter. When you take on somebody else's problems and save them from their own decisions or choices, you can end up enabling them, and you don't allow them a chance to grow. That's how you grow as a person. You make mistakes and you learn from them in life so that you don't make those same mistakes. But if a person ends up always saving another person, then what happens? A person continues to make those same mistakes. So it's actually a form of love by you allowing that person to grow, and you can express that to them. Hey, I can't save you from this, but here are some resources I can point you in the right direction of that can maybe help you get through it. But I personally can't save you. And sometimes that's how you have to communicate it. And if that person really loves you and cares about you, they will understand that. It's not you're turning your back on them or anything like that. It's you allowing them to grow as a person and you not absorbing their problems. And I've been in relationships where I was enabled. I was allowed to not handle my problems on my own. And I knew I could get possibly saved from other people, especially when I was battling with addiction. And that's why my addiction was able to go on so long, because I didn't really have to I had to face the consequences of my actions, but it was to an extent. I know, like, if I hit rock bottom, I had family or I had the person I was in a relationship with that could save me some type of way. So sometimes the best thing to do is honestly, like I said, give people the resources that they can get the help that they need on their own. But as far as you just coming in and saving them, most of the time that isn't the best thing to do. Not even like a romantic relationship, even with like your kids and stuff like that, you have to let them learn from their decisions sometimes. I know as parents, we can often want to save our kids from everything, but you have to let them grow. You won't always be there for them to handle all of their problems. You have to let them learn from their mistakes and also feel whatever they have to feel, get through whatever they have to get through. But you saving them always, that's not setting them up to succeed later on in life if you always save them. So it has to be a balance where you will help them to an extent, but it's to the extent that they are helping themselves. Sometimes we do need help from time to time, but you have to gauge, is the person helping themselves? Are they showing with their actions that they want to make the changes that they need to make in order that they don't end up in those same positions moving forward? So a third way to not end up in a codependent relationship is to raise your self-esteem. So a lot of times people who end up codependent, they allow their self-worth and self-esteem to be dependent upon how the other person feels about them. If that other person acknowledges them today or they give them compliments today, then they may feel good about themselves. But if that person maybe says some negative things or they treat them a certain way, then that person starts to feel bad themselves. And you have to have your self-esteem not dependent upon how other people behave or how other people treat you. Your self-worth should be dependent upon your own relationship with yourself, the words you say to yourself, and your actions, how you treat yourself. So you have to raise your self-esteem, you have to practice it, you have to reprogram your subconscious mind so that you are constantly doing things to raise your self-esteem. You journal, you write positive things. You don't let somebody else dictate about how you feel about yourself. You don't let somebody else dictate your self-esteem or your self-worth. So if you look at the dynamics of codependent relationships, it often almost always revolves around one or two of the people in the relationship having low self-esteem, and they end up needing each other because of that, and it's unhealthy. A healthy interdependent relationship looks like this person over here having high self-esteem, confidence, self-worth, and stuff like that. And then this person also having that same thing. And then they come together and they try to help each other and meet each other's needs and stuff like that. But it's not one person having low self-esteem and self-worth, and then you depend on this other person to boost your self-esteem or self-worth. And then when they don't do that, they don't validate you, then you have a bad day because of that, or you have negative emotions or negative mental space because of that. So that's when that can become a very unhealthy dynamic of a relationship. So a fourth way to not be codependent in relationships is practicing detachment. And you often have to detach from the love of other people or not being overly obsessed with other people. And one might ask, D, well, how can I do that? If I'm in a relationship with somebody, how can I not think about them? How can I not be obsessed with them? Yes, you are in a relationship with a person, if it's your wife or significant other, but you shouldn't be overly obsessed with them. You still should have your own identity, separate of anybody. You have to have your own separate identity. It can't be solely revolved around somebody else. A healthy interdependent relationship looks like this person having their own identity, this person having their own identity, and then they come together and try to have a collective healthy relationship. But it's not just everything is so intertwined. So you have to be independent from other people's behaviors and actions. It's not always everything that person does or their actions or behavior you're solely obsessed with it. You have to learn to detach from other people, even your significant other. Of course, certain behaviors and actions and everything, it affects you. Y'all are around each other a lot most of the time. People in codependent relationships or in a relationship with a narcissist and stuff like that, some people, they can't even go to the gym by themselves. They can't even go to dinner with their friends without it being a problem. They have to go every single where together. That's signs of codependency. A healthy relationship looks like sometimes you do your own thing with your friends, sometimes I do my own thing with my friends, and we communicate that with one another, and it still is a healthy, happy relationship. It's not so toxic that you can't ever detach from one another. So the fifth thing on today's list is practicing self-care. So that means taking care of yourself first. You have to take care of yourself first to be able to show up for your partner in a relationship. As they say, that quote that goes, you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself on the plane. They tell you that on the plane. You can't go helping other people if you don't have your own oxygen mask on. That same thing applies to relationships. In order for you to show up for other people, you need to be showing up for yourself. You don't want to get involved in relationship dynamics where you have to go above and beyond and do all this stuff for the other person. You're pouring into their cup every single day and going above and beyond, but then they're not pouring back in your cup. So you end up lacking taking care of yourself. You're not taking care of yourself. Your energy and everything is drained. Your emotional well-being, your psychology is drained because you're so overly focused on everybody else and you're not taking care of yourself. Now, of course, you have to take that into perspective. There will be certain days, weeks, months, or whatever where your partner may be going through a tough time. They may have some type of loss of a job, or they may have some type of family issues going on, or whatever the case is, or some type of health conditions even, where you may have to pick up more slack. You may have to put a little more in a relationship. It's not always 50-50 in anything. Sometimes it's 80-20, sometimes it's 90-10. Every day, of course, won't be balanced, but what I'm talking about is it's a habitual habit that you always have to do every single thing and this person doesn't reciprocate at all. It's all you, where you have to do all this stuff. You are the only one who has to go above and beyond. So that shouldn't be the case. If there's days like that where you pick up the slack for your partner because they're not feeling good or they're having a rough week at work or whatever the case is, they should at least be in return doing that for you on those days where you have that same thing or you have something similar. So essentially what I mean is you have to practice self-care in order for you to show up for your partner like you need to be the best for yourself. You should be able to have a day where you're allowed to go to the spa or you're allowed to go to do this or do that and take care of yourself. Have a mental health day in a relationship, whatever the case is. A lot of people think that's not okay. But the reality is, if you talk to licensed professionals, they will say that's perfectly fine. The other person is allowed to have their own days where they just take care of their mental and emotional self and they kind of can just detach and do their own thing so that they can show up and be the best version of themselves for you in the relationship. So those are a few different dynamics that you can put in place to make sure you aren't in a codependent relationship. It's something you can talk about with your partner. Maybe there's some things that you may need to work on, or drop in the comments. Have you had any of these type of patterns in your past that made you codependent? Drop it in the comments. I would be interested to hear what that problem was, or which one of these things on this list are most pertinent to you in your life, or have you had an issue with, and how are you going to address those moving forward so that you don't end up in a codependent relationship. Like the video if you got any value from it, and subscribe for weekly content. Watch the video on the screen because that's the one YouTube thinks you should watch next. Take care.